Hi, heroes. This is Stan Lee coming at you. Want you to know, Marvel has always been and always will be a reflection of the world right outside our window. That world may change and evolve, but the one thing that will never change is the way we tell our stories of heroism. Those stories have room for everyone, regardless of their race, gender, religion, or color of their skin. The only things we don't have room for are hatred, intolerance, and bigotry. That man next to you, he's your brother. That woman over there, she's your sister. And that kid walking by, hey, who knows? He may have the proportionate strength of a spider. We're all part of one big family, the human family, and we all come together in the body of Marvel. And you're part of that family. You're part of the Marvel universe that moves ever upward and onward to greater glory. In other words, Excelsior!
And what is going on, heroes? And welcome to just a quick conversation about the man, the myth, the legend, Stan Lee, and the life that he led. Unfortunately, this is a week that I think a lot of us fans knew would be coming sooner or later, and it just sucks that it's here now officially. But when I heard the news a couple of days ago that Stan had left us, I immediately thought, Shannon, what does he think about this situation? So I figured for this just this quick little chat that I would bring Shannon, co-owner of 901 Comics, into the conversation to see what he had to say. Not only a lifelong fan of comics, but co-owner of a comic book shop now currently, and just a lifelong lover of all things creativity and superheroes and everything that Stan kind of stood for. So I wanted to come meet up with you and get your thoughts about, like, when you first found out that Stan had left us. Like,
yeah.
What was your first thought when you first found out?
Actually, Duncan, that you actually broke the news to me.
I figured that was the case. Unfortunately, like I said, when I first heard the news, I immediately thought, I wonder what Shannon's thinking.
Yeah, and when you broke it to me,
and I texted you,
and we had the exchange back and forth. I'm like, what about Stan? What do you want to talk about, Stan?
Yeah, you were like, what about Stan? And I'm like, oh God, he doesn't know. So, oh man.
But immediately when you told me that that he had passed, I immediately thought about Jamie, my co-owner at 901 Comics, who worked with Stan for 5 years, and my heart just he had a personal.
How's he taking it? I didn't even.
He's been making it. The first day he was pretty torn up.
I'm sure he was, man.
They had a personal relationship,
right?
I mean, when you're
more personal than I think a lot of people do.
Yeah, when you spend 5 years going, now it was a day in, day out,
right?
But
right.
Conventions.
He worked for him at all the cons and everything like that.
And he worked for Stanley Collectibles, and when they got done with the cons, they went to dinner with Stan, and they went back to the hotel, and they had pajama parties, and they went just constantly.
I loved coming in here on days when Jamie was behind the counter, because there was a few times when we'd get to talking about movies and stuff like that, and he'd be like, "Oh, Stan shot his next 3 cameos the other day," and I was like, "Oh, that's so cool, man."
Yeah, he has. So this is one of the things that people don't realize or didn't know about Stan that Jamie got to know.
Right.
Is that Stan was extremely funny.
Right.
Was always teasing people and making jokes and just constantly having fun, and had tons and tons and tons of stories.
I'm sure, man.
And
he led a life.
So Jamie told me a story after we found out the passing about. Did I ever tell you about Stan telling me about when he met Eleanor Roosevelt? And I was like, what? Stan met Eleanor Roosevelt?
Dude, that's funny, man.
So
doesn't surprise me at all, though.
So apparently, Stan was working as an usher in a theater, and I might have this wrong, so Jamie, you can correct me or correct us later and post in the comments. But Stan was working as an usher in a theater.
That's awesome.
And he is walking up the aisle, and he trips over a lady's leg, and he turns around to apologize, and it was Eleanor Roosevelt.
Wow.
And it's like, here's Stan Lee, who we have in this huge pedestal in our comic book community. Him like looking in awe at Eleanor Roosevelt, one of the most influential women of the 20th century. So I don't know, there's tons and tons of stories like that I got to know, through Jamie.
Right.
And it's, I don't know,
that's one of the things that I'll forever regret is the fact that I never actually got to meet him. Like I never got to be one of those people that stood in line to wait to meet Stan Lee. I never was one of those guys that stood in line and got him to sign my arm and then immediately got it tattooed.
I didn't have to stand in line.
Oh, I forgot to VIP access. He's one of those Mount Rushmore. Like he is the Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
When people make that metaphor.
Right. It just reminded me of a story.
Go for it, man.
So my favorite Stan Lee story doesn't it doesn't have anything to do with me being around Stan Lee. I guess I took my son on a vacation. I guess he was probably about 14 years old, and we went to Florida to go to Walt Disney World.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Right.
Walt Disney World. And MegaCon in Orlando was happening that weekend. And it just so happened that Stan Lee Collectibles and Stan Lee was supposed to be there. And I was supposed to meet Tony, who worked with Stan Lee Collectibles, and help them load in, and was gonna I was probably gonna get to meet Stan.
Right.
Again.
Which is worth it.
Oh yeah. And I got free passes to MegaCon.
There you go.
But unfortunately, at that point, Stan's wife Joan got sick. And this is well before her passed.
Right.
She passed last year.
Right.
But this is well before she passed. And he kind of called and he canceled, and fortunately Stan couldn't make it to that event. But I did help them load in, and we got to go to MegaCon mainly because I had passed to MegaCon because the whole bridge of the Next Generation was there.
Oh,
and my son was a huge Star Trek fan,
wow.
So we got passes to go see them.
Very cool.
While I was helping out with the load in, and I had a badge that had Stan Lee Collectibles on it. Mm-hmm. So, therefore, everybody sees that and thinks I'm part of the entourage.
Right.
So I had brought Chris Claremont happened to be there that weekend, and I had brought some comics from my collection to get signed by Chris Claremont. And I walk over to Chris Claremont's booth, and like myself, Chris Claremont likes to talk a lot.
Okay.
And there was only about 5 people in line, but it took about 40 minutes to get up there.
Oh, wow.
Because he's just like, this constantly. So, this is before I owned the comic book shop.
Right.
And it was just a glimmer in my eye. And I'm sitting there, and I was like, hey, finally get my turn. Hey, Mr. Claremont, I really enjoyed your stories. You helped me get into comics, when I was a teenager. Loved it, blah, 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 blah. And he just starts talking. And he signs my comics, and then I feel pressure, I need to move on because there's people behind me.
Right.
I said, well, I'm going to get out of your way. And he was like, oh, hey, wait a minute. You have a Stan Lee badge on.
You work with Stan.
I was like, yeah, I'm over there with Tony. And he was like, well, I hate that he couldn't make it this weekend. Do you know why he couldn't make it? And I was like, well, apparently, Joan is sick and can't make it this weekend. And Chris Claremont says, hey, will you do me a favor? And I was like, sure. Will you tell Tony to tell Stan he needs to call me? I have a project that I want to talk to him about. Can you give me that? Can you let him know that Stan needs to call me? I was like, no problem, Mr. Claremont. And I didn't think about it. And then I start walking away, and I'm walking back to the Stan Lee booth with my signed Chris Claremont comics, and I'm like, holy crap.
You're delivering a message from Chris
Claremont
to Stan Lee.
To Tony to tell Stan Lee.
Right.
And I'm like, I started getting this oh, I'm somebody.
Right.
Like I am doing something. Like I am part of the comic book world.
That's awesome.
And it was just a moment of like, oh wow, you know. And of course I walked back and I'm like, hey Tony, you know, just tell him, Mr. Claremont needs you to tell Stan, tell Stan to call him.
Right.
You know. And I was just like, but that was such a huge moment for me.
I bet, man.
Just to be, and the honor just to be around the people that worked with him, and I got to meet him 3 times, which is
that's awesome, man. You know, I hate that I never got the chance to meet him, but dude, it seems like anybody that ever crossed paths with him, like you never had anybody you really never had anybody had anything negative to say about that interaction with Stan.
You don't live 95 years without making some kind of.
That's the thing, man. We'd all I think we'd all be lucky if we all lived to be 95.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that Stan was not without his controversy,
right?
And that was mainly because of creative differences and the big falling out with Jack Kirby,
right?
Which was a big.
And they never did. They ever?
They did.
Okay, that's what
he came back to Marvel Comics.
You know, because I was wondering the other day, you know, if you were to do like a Mount Rushmore of comics, like it probably would be like Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko.
If you were doing Marvel, yeah.
Okay, I'm just Marvel, like not like Bob Kane or anything like that, but.
Well, you know, I wouldn't even put Bob. I would put.
Well, Bob Kane did like the one thing.
Julius what's his name? Julius Schwartz for DC.
I gotcha. Okay.
Or maybe Infantino, Carmine Infantino.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
yeah, but if you were to do just like a Marvel side,
Steve Ditko.
It's those guys. Stan was the last one kind of left, you know, and depending
of the original.
Right. And it's just. Man, it's just crazy. You know, I saw Kevin Smith tweeted the day after, and he was like, I hate that I now live in a world without Stan Lee in it. You know what I mean?
Okay, so, but I take issue with that. Because, and if Kevin Smith, if you're watching, you can debate me about this, is that he and I and you and everybody alive right now will never live in a world without Stan Lee. Because his creations.
That's true.
And everything that he has done, that we're be able to build on and create these legacies of these characters. People will be reading Spider-Man in 200 years.
Right.
And even if we're not producing Spider-Man, somebody
go back and
will be reading Spider-Man,
X-Men
in 200 years, and like we will never live in a world without Stan Lee.
That's true. That's a good way to put it. I like that.
And my thing is there is a lot of sadness in the loss of him. And I don't want to take away from anyone's grief at all. I want people to grieve. I want people to miss him.
Yeah.
But if we break it down, Stan Lee knew, and the people that knew him knew this, he knew what kind of life he was living.
Mm-hmm.
He knew that not everybody lived this life. I mean, we're talking about a man who didn't really achieve success until his mid-40s.
Right. It's true.
And then, went through hard work. He was writing 7-8 titles for years.
Right. And I think it's one of those things that, in the heyday of comics, he was like on top of the world. And then, come like the 90s, like, like comics took their dip. But I mean, I think I would argue that with like the MCU and things like that, and his appearance in all the Marvel movies, that he is as popular as he ever was.
I agree with you 100%. But he got to live. He worked for years as a writer.
Right.
Didn't achieve success till his 40s, till he got to do what he wanted to do.
Right.
And then worked his butt off until the mid 70s, 80s, and still was working his butt off in the 80s,
mm-hmm.
and then steps away, and in 10 years after he stepped away, the bottom falls out of the freaking comic book market.
Right.
And then he starts his second career.
Right.
Movie production.
Yep.
And movies. And and then he has this is actually probably his third, fourth career.
Right. Yeah.
Actually.
It's so funny to hear him talk about like when he started writing comics. Stan Lee's not even his real name.
Oh yeah.
Stanley Lieber, he it's so funny to hear him talk about his early days in comics. like he was kind of ashamed of it, and
most people were,
and he didn't want to be associated with that. He changed, he went with a different like pen name, and then of course like he's the king now. That's like saying like Elvis, like he was like, I don't really want to play music. I don't. Yeah, that's not really my thing. And then just he falls into it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm sure you know the story about how Fantastic Four came about.
That with his wife, that Joan was just like, just do what you want to do.
Well, his editor came to him and was like, "Hey, give me a superhero story. Like superhero stories.
Something different.
No.
Oh well.
Give me superheroes are making their comeback because DC had started with Showcase and Carmen Infantino was like come up with new costumes for the new DC characters, and they're introducing a silver age of comics.
Right.
And while the costumes were different and there were some aspects that were different, they still were just cookie cutter,
Right.
Like Flash was more scientific, but yet he was still just like one comic was one story, nothing that like was engaging from issue to issue to issue. And then here's Stan Lee's like he was about to quit.
Right.
And Jones like, you know what? If he tells you to do something, do it the way you want to do it.
Right.
So him and Jack Kirby sit down and they come up with the Fantastic Four.
Right. And then that's
and
it.
then from there it's just
different.
like crazy.
Some of the characters that he was responsible for creating. You got the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, obviously, the original X-Men. What else? Daredevil, Hulk, Doctor Strange, Black Panther.
Yep.
Black Panther. I think that's
there's
a ton more. But I'm talking about like the big name games. Okay, so Thor was one that I was.
Iron Man.
Iron Man, that's right.
Yeah.
I knew. So Captain America predated him.
And did we mention Daredevil?
Yeah, Daredevil, of course. Yeah, like your bread and butter. Yeah. But Thor was the one that when we were talking about it the other day, that was the one that I couldn't remember if he created the background for Thor. He
basically was like.
Practically the only one he didn't like create. We decided the other day the two biggest characters that I think he didn't have a real hand in their creation is Captain America and Wolverine.
Submariner.
Submariner. True.
Yeah. So
I didn't even realize. I'm like, he did X-Men, but he didn't really do Wolverine.
No, that was
that was later.
Yeah. Trippy and Lin Wayne, but I mean. Like
all these characters that we all love from the movies, it's like they wouldn't exist without him.
And the thing is that the rub of like people that say negative things about Stan didn't really create these characters, or that
Doom Patrol. I forgot about Doom Patrol.
Doom Patrol.
I'm sorry. Doom Patrol is no.
See,
like that's the controversy is like some people say like what came first, X-Men or Doom Patrol.
Yeah.
Hopefully X-Men came first.
Actually, Doom Patrol came first.
Did it really?
Yeah.
Okay, so.
But but the thing that DC didn't do is that they didn't capitalize on the whole like. This is what made it brilliant. So Doom Patrol was weird, and they were led by a guy in a wheelchair.
Right.
And they were odd, and kind of stuff like that. But
really excited for the show, by the way.
But yeah, me too.
So excited for the show.
But what Stan Lee did is he said, "Hey, what's going on around us?"
Right.
The civil rights movement.
Right.
And let's incorporate this into our story. And that's what made he created Black Panther.
Yeah. With Steve Ditko, or that might have been Doctor Strange. It was him and Jack Kirby that created Black Panther. Yeah.
And the thing is, Black Panther during the civil rights movement, extremely controversial.
Right. And that's that's what I think Stan like should go down in history with is like comics looked a certain way until Stan really got his hands on things, and then like we can thank him for like the diversity in these characters that we love so much these days. It's all Stan
pushing the envelope.
Yeah, it's all really Stan. Like so he was the front runner at least when all the other characters were. White people. And
the next, yeah.
You look at all the classic DC characters; they're all kind of white people.
Yeah.
That's
Don Stewart, and that was like way.
Yeah, that was way. Yeah, exactly.
But I want to back up just a little bit, and I'm just tell my personal thing, my connection with Stan, which is really neat for me, is that like before when I was growing up and I started reading Marvel comics and getting into like the actual like collecting of comics. When I was a kid, I just read comics.
Mm-hmm. Just whatever you get your hands on.
Yeah. Usually at that time, Batman,
right,
Superman, the mainstream DC
Wonder
comics.
Woman.
Because I saw Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
That was my first.
I know, yeah. I've heard the story. Yeah.
And that was because of Super Friends.
Oh, okay.
Because that's what, and I gravitated toward that, and watching the Adam West Batman, things like that.
Gotcha.
But I started reading Marvel comics more and more when I was like 10, 12, 11. And I went 10, 11, 12, not 10, 12, 11. I didn't go back.
You didn't go skip a grade.
But I started reading these things, and in the back, if they didn't have a letters page, it had Marvel's bullpen bulletins.
Okay.
And then within the bulletins, it would be like, item, this thing coming out this month, or, it would tell you things that you, like, it just kept you informed about what's happening in Marvel Comics. This is the time before internet, time before, like, you could look things up, just by the touch of your finger.
Right.
And so you found out what was coming out by looking at bullpen bulletins. And inside the bullpen bulletins, it's just a page, instead of a letters page. And inside of bullpen bulletins, there's always it was called Stanley's Soapbox.
Oh, I think I've heard of this.
And he would talk directly to the reader.
Wow.
And and sometimes
it's like Twitter.
Yeah. And he would like talk about like, oh, we have these upcoming things, or or he would talk about something that's going on in society right then, and try to like he was talking to you going like, hey, be a good person.
Right.
And that resonated with me as a kid. Here was this guy who to me was like
right, larger
than life.
Yep.
Who I had only seen really and truly on like illustrated on paper.
Right.
Hadn't really seen
really
an image
popped
of him.
up in stuff yet.
Yeah. And you felt like a nerd because you were reading comics. And it's not like you could go like, oh, did you read, go to school and be like, hey, did you read Stanley's Soapbox this week in X-Men?
Yeah.
And that was my first relationship with Stan, is reading these columns that he wrote in these comics. And I'm like, I found myself looking, after I read the comic and poured through the ads, then that was like the icing on the cake, is reading that stuff. And I looked forward to reading those. And, over years, that was my relationship with him.
Right.
And
just following along with what he had to say. Pre-internet, that's crazy.
So, and, when for years and years and years, that's the way I thought of him. And when I finally got to meet him, it wasn't just I was meeting this guy, like, who created these things. I was meeting that guy that wrote those little columns to me when I was a kid.
Right. And
that was really a connection for me that I'm sure a lot of older readers share.
Right.
And so
that was kind of, there was, Stan was, by the time I kind of got interested in comics, it was the 90s, and Stan was basically not really doing it as much anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that, I wonder, like, I don't know what Marvel Comics has planned. I'm sure they're going to do something big for him. But, it's interesting that, like, especially there towards the end, he didn't really have as much to do with the comics. He was, he did the movies, and that was kind of it.
Right,
but,
right.
Dude, like, it wouldn't exist if it wasn't for him. And I'm very interested to see, like, kind of, because I've been watching so many, like, interviews with him this week, and little clips and little motivational things that are of him speaking on the internet, and it's amazing that, like, he was just like a normal dude, and then he just took a job, and then he's now like the face that he is. You know what I mean? And it's just crazy that I don't think there'll ever be really another. I don't, at least with comics, I don't know if there will be another like Stan.
That was something that came up. I did the news agencies here in Memphis, local news agencies, called us.
Okay, so you said you were on. That's what that was for. Okay,
I was on the news 3 different stations.
Dang, I'm late then because
No, but they, the day he passed, they called and they wanted to do interviews, and Jamie unfortunately was in no condition to.
Right.
He was very, very upset and very bothered by this, and Jamie doesn't like to be on camera.
Yeah.
And so
right.
he called me. I came from home, did one interview, and then 2 other agencies called and came up here. So I spent about 2.5 hours of my day on Monday, right?
Monday, Veterans Day.
Yeah.
It was such a good day. That it was because we got the news about. I was in my car eating my lunch at work, and I saw the message come by, and it was because we had gotten that day we got a thing for Toy Story 4 and a thing for Detective Pikachu, the movie,
yeah.
and I was so happy about that stuff. And then we got that news, and I was, dude, I did, dude. It's so funny. Like, I never met the guy. Like, it's a guy that I never met, but I think he has I think if you sit down and if you really think about it, he affected your life somehow. Like, there's a character that you love, or there's the movies that you love.
Read a comic.
Exactly. And it's like I found myself getting like emotional for a few minutes, like, and I'm like, I never met this guy, like, and
I didn't get emotional until.
I get emotional pretty easily.
Well, I do too, though. Like,
yeah.
But I didn't get emotional till later that night.
Right.
And then the next day, because let me back up. We were on a track before. Was one of the reporters were like, oh, who's the next Stan Lee? And I was like, there will never ever be another Stan Lee. No one will be able to create a universe that people will be able to build on
for
like he created. He had
generation,
he had, and I don't mean this in the wrong way. He had such a stranglehold on what content was when it came into in the 60s. What came into the Marvel Universe had to mesh with Fantastic Four, had to mesh with Spider-Man, had to mesh with Hulk, had to mesh with Avengers. Everything. It couldn't just be like this one story that was like way out there.
Another thing. He didn't create all those characters, but we would not have Avengers if it wasn't for Stan.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
which is the biggest thing going.
And you couldn't you couldn't just create something that lived on its own over here. It had to somehow connect to the Marvel universe.
Right.
And there was this one continuous timeline that he made. Like, you have to write within this world, whether it was something weird like Ghost Rider that could team up with the Avengers,
right,
or team up with Doctor Strange, or Nova, who's
Captain Marvel, whatever.
But that's these things like, so he he controlled a universe, and helped create it and molded it into this huge thing that what we have now, we see on cinema. That's why it's so big.
I really appreciate you taking the time, sitting down and chit-chatting with me a little bit. I knew this would be something fun to do. I didn't know. I didn't realize that the news channels had gotten to you before.
Yeah.
I should have known better. That makes total sense. But yeah, man, I appreciate you doing this. And like we said, there won't ever be another Stan. And it sucks that he's gone. But like you so eloquently put it, like he'll live on way past us, which is that's something that I think everyone can appreciate. And so I guess that's about it.
There's only one way to end this.
What's that?
1, 2, 3, Excelsior.
Excelsior.
All right,
Okay.
ready? 1, 2, 3,
Excelsior. Thanks so much for everybody for checking out this video. Be sure if you are in the Memphis area to check out 901 Comics, Shannon's home, and I don't know where I was going with that. Shannon's the place to be for anything Stan Lee.
Friendly neighborhood comic book shop.
There you go. I forgot that's the thing that you're going with. Yeah. Friendly neighborhood comic shop. Be sure to check it out, guys. Be sure to check out the pantheon of videos that we have on HeroShot Media. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. If you guys are listeners of the audio podcast, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, whatever your preferred podcasting platform of choice. And with all of that said, I guess we'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.